Hello, that should be live. Hello, everyone who is joining us today. We have the honor and the privilege of being joined by Dr. Fantasy himself. And so today we're going to be talking about The Way of Edan, the debut release of Philip Chase. Hey, Philip, how you doing?
I'm doing great, and it is wonderful to see you two, my favorite pair of brothers on YouTube by far, and my friends. And I thank you for inviting me here today to discuss my debut, my release of The Way of Edan. I just got my author copies today. So
Today's the day. Perfect timing.
Yeah, today. So here they are, ready to show off. Yeah, the postal system has been a little bit broken lately, so it's taken a while, but here it is. And
it looks amazing in the flesh, doesn't it? How does it feel seeing kind of it in the flesh, the book, the cover, everything there for the first time?
It's surreal, to tell you the truth. Yeah, it's kind of like, whoa, did I do that? You know? And of course, I didn't do it alone. I had a lot of help. I had some, the cover I'm so happy with, and both my artist, Kira Gregory, and my cover designer, Jack Shepard, did a beautiful job. Jack also did the map inside, and I cannot thank them enough and compliment them enough. Just kind of shouting out their praises everywhere I go, because I think they did a wonderful job. And I think that it's a distinctive cover, you know? And one of the reasons, one of the reasons I'm glad I self-published is I don't think if I had said to a traditional publisher, I want a stained glass window cover, they would have listened to me. So I'm happy with this.
Yeah, we actually had one of our patrons. They were asking, wondering if we could ask you, was there a specific scene or idea that really stemmed kind of this vision of a stained glass cover?
Yeah, so I mean, we're not doing spoilers right now, right? So
no, not at the moment.
Okay, yeah. So, but I can speak to that without a spoiler. It is a particular scene that's early in the book, and I think it'll be fairly clear to readers what that scene is. And it is obviously very stylized as a stained glass window. So a couple things I was thinking when I actually requested the stained glass window myself, and I had a few reasons. One, the book is about, oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Christy. The book is about a religious war, and religion is a very important aspect of the story. And I felt that a stained glass window look would evoke that idea of religion being a central idea here. So that's a big part of why I wanted a stained glass window. I also was very interested in the stained glass windows designed by Edward Burne-Jones in the 19th century. He was associated with the later Pre-Raphaelites, very close friend of William Morris's. And William Morris is the guy whose work I wrote my dissertation about. So that's something that's near and dear to me as well. So it's not exactly medieval stained glass. It's more like this 19th century imitation of medieval stained glass. So I was interested in kind of replicating that look, the aesthetic of it. And so I'm really happy with the result. I just couldn't be happier with how it turned out, and trying to evoke all the right vibes, I guess, in a way. But it's not a traditional fantasy cover at all. It doesn't have a sword, no sword or no, beast or anything on the cover there. So.
But it's very striking, isn't it?
It's beautiful. And as you said, you have that creative freedom since you self-published that you can pick and choose basically whatever you want, which is such a big plus, isn't it, to being self-pubbed?
Yeah, I think so. There are benefits. You know, once in a while, of course, somebody who's traditionally published gets a great cover too, like John Gwynne with the there you go, The Shadow of the Gods and The Hunger of the Gods, both awesome covers. Probably my candidates for favorite fantasy cover ever. But I think it's true that most traditionally published authors would probably agree they have zero influence on the cover they get. A lot of times they're like, I had no say in it at all, you know? Yeah. So I'm really happy to have that freedom. That's fun. I do enjoy that.
Yeah, I guess that kind of leads me into the question of obviously going self-published. Obviously, that gives you a lot of freedom, but also a lot of responsibility in having to juggle everything, which I can't even imagine all the different components that most people don't really see. They kind of just think, oh, you write the book, someone does a bit of art, and then it's kind of thrown out there. But there's obviously so much more to it. And so how was it kind of having that learning curve and kind of putting all these pieces together?
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, I'm not a very technically savvy person. So, you know, becoming a booktuber was a huge education for me. And a lot of people would say that I still don't do very, I don't make videos that are high in production value. I don't, do a lot of snazzy effects or anything like that. I have some decent thumbnails now. I think I've made progress.
Your thumbnails are top tier, Philip.
They honestly they make me laugh every single time. We aspire to have thumbnails like that.
Well, maybe they're top tier on the goofy scale, but
some of your chats with Murphy Napier, the thumbnails are just brilliant.
I'm having fun with those. I'm having fun with the chats and the thumbnails. So yeah. But yeah, so I had to learn a lot. And fortunately for me, I had been working on the books, the story, for 18 years. And so that part, I have no problem. And the part that has been more of a challenge is learning how to use Vellum, which is a tool that a lot of self-published authors use to format their books, how to upload stuff to, I'm using both Amazon KDP and Ingram Spark. And there's just little technical things to all that I've had to learn. And sometimes I make little, I don't know if people realize this, but when the book became available a few days early, that was a goof, on my part. I just kind of oops, or the fact that the ebook became available, I think about 3 weeks for pre-order. That was an accident, actually. So I'm like, oops, I made the pre-order available. I guess it's out there, so I just kind of roll with stuff, but it's been a huge education for sure.
Yeah, I imagine so. And it's amazing seeing in the comments loads of people who The Way of Edan has only been out for a few days, but so many people saying that they've read it and absolutely loved it. And what you're saying about kind of that writing for 18 years, it leads us on to another question one of our patrons asked Steve. He said, could you talk us through a bit of this process? Obviously, it's a bit hard when it's 18 years, but kind of condense that, maybe the first moment where where you really saw this story, like the birth of it and the beginning of the journey.
Oh gosh, so 18 years of history there. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not asking too much.
No, it's great. I knew from age 12, 13 that I wanted to write fantasy. And so I thought I had to do what my hero did, who is, of course, J.R.R. Tolkien, the person who kind of put me on this path, because I was so blown away with the experience of reading Lord of the Rings that I just said to myself as a kid, that's what I want to do with my life. I want to do this for people, So I thought I had to go about this the way he did, which was to learn a bunch of archaic languages and do a ton of world building. And so
tried and tested method.
Tried and tested, right? Somewhere along the line, I actually realized, I have to learn how to actually write a story too, don't I? So I had to learn a lot of stuff. But at a certain point in 2004, I felt ready. So I drew a map, and the map that you see in the book now is pretty much what I drew. Of course, Jack has made it look much nicer, but that's, what I drew more than 18 years ago. And the other starting point was Beowulf was a huge, huge, huge influence in my life. And I got and there's a lot of Beowulf in the book. I'll be talking about that, I'm sure, a few times, just in the way I've conceived of the method of storytelling. There's a lot of stories within the story, which is very much a Beowulfian nod. But there was a character mentioned in Beowulf, just a throwaway name. It was a warrior that Beowulf kills, almost it's like one line. And I always thought that is the coolest name. I wish there was a story about this guy, because he has an awesome name. The name is Dayraven. In Old English, Dayraven. So I figured it was better maybe to put it in modern English. So people wouldn't have to. So Alan wouldn't have to say that, in their narrating. But anyway, yeah, I thought, what a cool name. There should be a story about this guy, or at least about a character with that name.
Yeah.
My story is not the story of the warrior that Beowulf killed. He's not going to meet Beowulf, but I stole the name thinking, this name deserves a story. So that's kind of where I started, really.
And then did you kind of plan a lot, or did you kind of just go with it from there on?
Yeah, so I'm very much a planner. As I said, I went the Tolkien route, which means I didn't go the full extent. Like, I didn't do the full Tolkien thing, but I did write about 100 pages of world building, and that includes the religions and mythology and the history of this place, of Jormungand, which is, by the way, the etymology there. Land is simply land, and Jormund, it's the same element you see in the Norse name for the Midgard serpent, right? Which is Jormungand. And Jormund just means vast. It means big. It means huge. So that's, yeah, I forgot what I was answering there, but I was having fun.
Yeah, well, I was actually talking to someone called Steve Horan, and he was saying how a lot of these names and places of yours, it feels like they're not just names that you kind of thought, oh, that's cool. There's more depth to it and meaning, and that is part of what adds really this immersive nature to the Way of Edan. And when he said, when he asked if you've done that intentionally, I thought I'll ask you, but I'm pretty certain that it is, knowing obviously your approach and your style to it.
Yeah, there are a ton of, if you know Old English, you'll get some of my little winks in there. And if you know Old Norse, you'll get some. If you know a South Asian language, there's a chance you'll get some, especially later as the story progresses in books 2 and 3. Yes, and if you know Welsh, I've modeled a lot of stuff on the sounds of Welsh as well. So you might get stuff if you know some of those languages, because I have embedded little fun things in there for me. Some of the things I put in there are not little winks; they're actually thematic, and that does come from the stuff that are major inspirations for me, including a lot of the medieval stuff. So I've tried to do what you find in Beowulf, which is, on the surface, it's a monster slaying story, right? But when you go a bit deeper, when you look at, well, why are all these side stories in here? What are these about? And you start to realize, oh wait, there's a thematic echo here. It's associative. Old English poetry is associative, as you guys know. So there are, in these little stories within the story, I'm always trying to do something to forward the theme that I'm exploring in the main story. So hopefully people catch on to that too. The songs are important, everybody.
And they really are. When you think, a lot of it is subconscious, isn't it? Especially when you think of immersion, which is, to me, one of the key aspects of storytelling. Immersion is so integral. And yeah, talking about kind of that thematic approach with Beowulf earlier, you mentioned kind of the idea of storytelling and that theme. And that's very prevalent in the Way of Edan, oral retellings, but also the history of the land. And of course, the main plot arc as well. And kind of these individual stories within the grander, more epic kind of events taking place and how people are swept along with it. So I imagine the answer is going to be yes. But again, was that kind of intentional, and was that something you were slowly trying to eke out and bring out as the story progressed?
That was very much intentional. Yeah. And you put it really well there. I think writers are people who are often fascinated by the act of storytelling. So it's something that you often see, in a lot of our favorite fantasies. I can name several, but there is a fascination with storytelling itself. Like The Name of the Wind, for example, is definitely a book that is in some way about storytelling itself.
Yeah,
there's a story within the story. Sometimes there are stories within the story within the story.
Yeah,
there's a fascination with storytelling, and that is something I definitely share. It's not the main theme of the book, but it is certainly a big part of it. And I'm interested too, not just for the sake of having, a song or a little history lesson in the middle of the story. I'm interested in how those stories relate to the present. So I can't give specifics because they would be spoilers, but that is something that I'm fascinated by, and I find enriching. And you can open up, I think, new lenses onto the theme that you're exploring in the main story by having these other stories to the side where you give the reader another look at this theme. So I can just say, without spoilers, exile is a major theme. I have a couple characters who are going through a kind of exile. I also have a story about someone who lived hundreds of years before, who experienced exile from a slightly different perspective. And that is something that the characters in the present not only can relate to, but can use, just as we use stories to make sense of our lives. You can see it in real time in the story of the present, the character using the story of the past to process what's happening to them. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I imagine it's hard when you've got all this, as he said, like 100 pages of notes of the histories. It must take a real discipline to kind of wait for the right moment for that to become relevant, to put in there, to add backstory, and of course thematically as well, and leading to the plot later on. And that's something that I think is brilliant, because you want that immersion, don't you? But you also want it to kind of feed into the story and help it evolve in the present as well.
That's very true. And some of them, by the way, won't come to full fruition until books 2 and 3. I mean, I've got some foreshadowing that I tried to put in there that you can see already in the first book, but there's stuff happening even, in the first book, stories within stories that are definitely a kind of, that's a huge compliment. Thank you so much. Yeah. That's a very huge compliment to me. And I know that, John Gwynne and I share a reverence and a love for Tolkien's work and many other influences as well. Yeah. So to be compared to him in any context is, for me, a tremendous compliment. So, but yeah, I hope people will see that 18 years, you get time to go back and think about, how can I make this relate more to book 3 or whatever. So.
Yeah, that's going to be another one of my questions. Obviously, you've written book 2 and 3, and so you've been able to, I imagine, when book 2 and 3 come out, it'll become far more evident how kind of linked and how you've linked kind of the beginning to the end. Was there a lot of kind of retrospection when you're kind of finishing up, returning to book 1, adding little details that, as you said, will come to fruition later on?
Yes. Oh, yeah. There are whole chapters that I added after finishing the trilogy, realizing, I need more of this character. That might be surprising to people. Like chapter 2 is relatively speaking, a new chapter because.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That wasn't originally there. And I realized I needed this character much earlier in the story. Chapter, oh gosh, what is it now? I can't remember because the chapters keep changing. But fortunately, I have a copy here. I think it's 6. No. Sorry, 8. Chapter 8. Where we meet a certain high priest for the first time, really up close. Yeah. That's a relatively new chapter.
Wow, that was one of my favorite moments as well. But when I'm rereading it at the moment and absolutely loving it, and again, that's kind of a moment that really just sticks in the mind.
Yeah, those chapters do so much for the story, and also showing your wide range of characters as well. I absolutely love them. We've got a great comment here from PL saying that Tolkien would be nodding in approval. If he were to read your book, Phillips, that's I'm definitely sure he would, and he would probably pick up on lots of the languages as well. But we've got to mention the songs and the poetry. I just love how you had alliterative verse in there, and it's just something that I really geek out over. And probably my favorite one. Tolkien did a beautiful alliterative verse, didn't he? And yeah, so I love them. They're always so much fun in your books. Usually, lots of people, they might moan a bit about songs and stuff, don't they? Or they might skip over them. I know is there a few poems or songs in the Malazan books, I believe.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Poems all over the place. And
I know, yeah. It's good to see. Yeah, lots of people are saying they've really enjoyed yours as well. So they're actually reading them. Good.
Yeah, Erickson doesn't tend to put them in the middle of the chapters. They're more like epigraphs at the beginning. Okay. So that's where they usually are. But in my case, they're woven into the story. And they are, as you say, Old English, modeled on Old English verse. That's alliterative, 4 stresses per line. I had a good time teaching Alan how to read this type of verse. So hopefully that comes out well. I think he's going to have fun with it when he does the audiobooks.
Yeah.
But yes, it's a very deliberate, archaic style of poetry that harkens back to these Old English bards who were called shopes. And I call them shapers in my book. And it was a way, so these poems, besides the fact that I tried to make them foreshadowing and related to the themes, this type of poetry in these older cultures was vastly important because of how much of the cultural identity was passed along in these stories. So if you want to know the history of an older people, you need to know their stories. What stories did they tell about themselves? And that so much of their identities are wrapped up in there. And the idea that one of the ways in which they could face mortality was to the idea that we'll do great deeds so your name will live on and the bards will sing of you. And that's the identity around which their descendants wrap themselves. So to speak.
The idea of legacy.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah, I guess that leads nicely into kind of what we've been saying, and a lot of people saying that the Way of Edan feels like a great mix of modern but also classic fantasy, and kind of that blend. And I imagine that kind of stems from books that you love and your passions.
Yes. Oh, yes. So I've talked a lot about Tolkien, and I think that's fairly evident to everybody that Tolkien is part of my DNA. Ursula Le Guin is also a really important writer for me, and I feel her influence is just on my prose is just as important as Tolkien's. And specifically, I'm talking about the Ursi books.
Yeah.
But also, I definitely read some George R.R. Martin before I wrote these books. I probably read, while I was writing, I think I probably read some Abercrombie. I read, there were other authors that had, I guess, a more later influence on the book, the writing process, and maybe not as consciously, but yeah, it goes back to a lot of just my love of fantasy, really, and also medieval stuff. And I'm trying to present it in a way that's palatable for modern readers. Like, hopefully, you don't have to think about all this, subtextual stuff. Hopefully, you can also just enjoy the story as an entertaining story. So.
Yeah, well, one of the things is it feels nostalgic, even though it's like a new read, because it's got that kind of those classic elements. But I love that kind of embracing the newer side of fantasy, those kind of grayer characters, kind of those complex relationships, and taking tropes but subverting them, because they're tropes for a reason, aren't they? Because readers really enjoy them, but you want a fresh lens on them, and that's kind of the combination of classic and modern, isn't it? And I absolutely love how you bring that here, where you've kind of got that feel to Middle Earth, where with the immersion to the lands and some happy places that you just want to stay in. I'd be happy to read a book of just Raven staying home and just having a great time. But then sadly he doesn't. Yeah, basically, we won't go further into depth than that. But
it's on the back cover. It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I absolutely love, kind of that combination where it's still really interesting, but it's got those tropes that we absolutely love and we love to see in fantasy. And it's great to see kind of, I think in fantasy there's been a big distance from kind of those more classical themes, but I think it's coming around a bit more, and the Way of Edan I think will become a bit of a staple for that.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, and I love where fantasy is going, and I think it's incredibly enriched by the diversity that we're seeing in the genre, and I'm all for it. I also think that people still love a lot of the things that make classical fantasy, what it is. And I guess everybody has their own tolerance level for tropes, right? I mean, to me, the word trope often seems to have a kind of a negative connotation to it, but really it should be a neutral word. I believe it's a tool. A trope is a tool, and if you use it well, great. And maybe people will call it an archetype if you use it well. If you use it poorly, then probably people will call it a cliche. Yeah. But a trope in and of itself is not a bad thing, and I think that they exist for a reason, don't they? I mean, tropes exist because they speak to human experience on some level. They speak to things that we need to wrestle with, and things that that help us to make sense of the world. They are patterns, right? Tropes are patterns. And when we see those patterns, we recognize them, and they help us to wrestle with life, which is often pretty chaotic. They help us to impose a kind of pattern onto life, a meaning, I suppose. So, then we have a question.
Yeah, so that kind of brings to mind, kind of Cormac McCarthy said books are made out of other books. And it kind of brings in, obviously, with tropes being inspired by so many others, but then taking your own lens on it. And yeah, basically the whole time I'm just going to be saying I love the Way of Edan, and this is something it does brilliantly. And it is so interesting. I loved our chat last year that we did on your channel. But it's great as I'm rereading it, kind of more questions springing to mind and getting all the answers that we can. But before we get further, we had one of our patrons, Jen, and also Fantasy Fanatic here, asking, do you have a favorite character or one that you loved to write?
That is such a hard. Do I have a favorite child? Let's see. You know, I will answer. It's not exactly a direct answer, but I will say that the character of Yoruman surprised me. And I realized, and I told everybody earlier that I went back and had to write chapter 8. That's one of his chapters. He surprised me, and I don't like him necessarily, but I sympathize with him in some ways. And he kept telling me, I'm important here, and you need to come back to me. And he took on a role gradually. I'm not going to give any spoilers for the rest of the trilogy here, but he became more important as I was writing. And I didn't expect that. I did not expect that. So that's why I had to add that chapter later on. I realized, I got to go back and put him earlier in this. So yeah, I think maybe that's my sort of cop-out answer. Although I love them all, I love writing them all. I can see in not all, but most of the characters, I can see little facets of myself, I guess you could say, which might sound disturbing. Yeah,
slightly worrying about some of the characters, but we know you're a good guy, Philip.
Yeah.
Right.
But I love that kind of, as you said, you did plan a lot, but then also going with the kind of inspiration of the moment, which I think a lot of the best books do, because it brings back its own life, doesn't it? And it feels more kind of natural and organic.
Yeah, I agree. And as I said, yes, I am a planner, but sometimes the story just tells you where to go, and you got to listen when your story is talking to you. So, yeah.
I've just seen this amazing quote, and it really kind of mirrors what you were saying, weren't you? Obviously, about the inspiration of Dayraven seeing it in Beowulf, and taking a life of its own.
Yeah, I mean, he is the ultimate example of somebody who writes from a linguistic impulse, let's say.
Yeah.
And he could make something romantic and beautiful out of just, I love the essay where he talks about the words cellar door, right? The cellar door, right? I mean, you say that word enough, those two words enough times, and you put them together, and it sounds like something romantic almost. The sound of it, cellar door, right? We're talking about the door to the cellar here. But he just had such an incredible, sensitive mind to words and what they evoke. And I think that's just so beautiful. And I probably, on some level, imbibed that idea from probably him. But I certainly start with names too. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that leads to, are you, as this quote said, as this comment says, do you think of things quite visually or vividly as you're writing? So is that something that really kind of plays into the writing? You're imagining this scene around you.
Yeah. So when I write, I'm a very visual writer, and I will often lie down on my bed and just close my eyes and see the scene before I write it. And so that's very visual. And other times, this is kind of embarrassing to admit, but I will actually, when I'm trying to get an expression right for a character, I go to the mirror and I make faces in the mirror to see, okay, what's he doing here? How would you describe that? And
I love that.
So I actually make faces in the mirror to help me with my writing descriptions. Yeah.
I think we need a video of in the day in the life of Philip James. Yeah, definitely. Just start with looking like that in the mirror. Yeah.
That's brilliant though, because often actually when reading books, when people describe an expression, authors, I actually try and mirror it, and often I'm like, I don't really get that. I can't really see it, but I love that you've actually been doing it, and that's just a brilliant detail. That is fantastic.
Yeah, whatever works, right?
Yeah, and it definitely does. And now, this leads to another point. You are spoiling us. It is the year of Philip Chase. You're releasing a book every 3 months, and I really cannot wait for book 2. and 3. So yeah, people saying that they're already waiting for the next one, but yeah, we cannot wait. Obviously, with most books, you're waiting a year minimum, aren't you? But 3 months, it's going to be absolutely awesome. So what is the kind of general plan for that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The second book I'm planning to release on June 21, and the third book on September 21. So we're going with, like, the change of seasons, right? For each release. So I just wanted something that's easy to remember. And I wanted to put them out every 3 months. And I really am doing that because I totally get that people don't enjoy waiting a year. I don't know about you guys, but when I read a book and I'm waiting for book 2 for a whole year, I tend to get a bit fuzzy on the details from book 1. So I can understand people maybe not wanting to pick up the first book until the second or third would be out. So I hope that by delivering them in that short period, basically in a 6-month period, that it'll be conducive to a better reading experience for people. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Because yeah, we all kind of forget, but I often will look at a video or see if there's something which is kind of a bit of a synopsis of a summary of book 1. But it's going to be absolutely fantastic. And am I right? There's going to be, is it a sequel or prequel standalone you got planned for 2024?
Yes, yeah. I actually, and so in those 18 years, I actually wrote 4 books, and one is a standalone sequel that takes place about 15 years after the end of the trilogy. And it's called While Darkness Gathers. So yeah, it's all ready pretty much for me to go back to and revise. And I definitely want to show that one to my nemesis / developmental editor. That's AP Canavan over at A Critical Dragon, who's been a brilliant help in helping me to prepare these to make them as good as I can. So that'll be a process, but I'm pretty confident we can get the sequel out in 2024. Yeah,
that's brilliant. The sooner the better, but obviously got to take the time and make sure that you feel right about it. But yeah, fingers crossed to see it as soon as possible. And this links, yeah, I really felt kind of in your work kind of the link between heroism and tragedy and how intertwined they are. And even throughout amongst all the darkness and despair, there is that theme of hope, which you're hoping will prevail, but it's a very fragile thing. And yeah, I absolutely love that. And again, it kind of gave me that more classical feel as well as the modern. Whereas books like maybe The First Law don't have so much hope, but I still, even though The First Law is one of my favorite series, it's something I absolutely love to see. And as I said, that relationship between heroism and tragedy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a good thing that Abercrombie makes us laugh. Otherwise, those books might be intolerable. But
yeah, it's a very bleak affair.
Yeah, I mean, he's just so brilliant with his humor and his characters that for some reason, as flawed and as awful as they are as human beings, we end up rooting for them, which is, I guess why his books are so brilliant. But yeah, I think that to have light, you need darkness. They are most definitely dependent on each other. To have love, you must have loss. So the fact that there is sorrow in this world, I think is essential, and I hope that it does convey, though, at the same time, a sense of beauty and a sense of hope, because I'm most definitely trying for that. I don't want them to, I wouldn't, and I'm a fan of a lot of grimdark myself, but I don't think of myself as a grimdark author. Though I do have plenty of violence and suffering, and one thing I do admire about grimdark is its honesty, and I try to be honest in that sense. So I think there might be some slight grimdark tones to it, actually. But yeah, I'm interested in exploring hope and beauty, just as interested in those things. In fact, ultimately, I'd like my readers to leave with a sense of catharsis. But I remember a lot of my favorite reads have left me in tears, and those tears are a mixture of joy and sorrow. So, that's how that is. That's life.
Yeah, it's really that roller coaster of emotions, isn't it? And I love kind of the friendship, without spoiling anything, between Dayraven and Imhar. And yeah, you really capture that. And it's so amusing just kind of reading through the pages. And in the back of your mind, something bad is about to happen, and it's not going to be enjoyable for them. But you're just kind of in that moment, and it really is like life, isn't it? Where you can be in a kind of terrible place, but you still have these moments of laughter and friendship, because that's another theme at the core, isn't it? Friendship and that motivation to do things for those you love around you. Others are much more about self-preservation and about rising to the top themselves. But I love kind of that mirror that you've got between them, kind of capturing the entire scope of kind of the human condition.
That's so well said, Will. And I believe that in one sense, what we do here on BookTube is essentially the same. We gather around stories that we all love, and we talk about them. We share our love, and it's like, you know, back in the day when the people would sit around in the mead hall listening to the bard tell a story. They're all sitting around the fire, right? And I think we've talked about that story that Beda tells, right, in his Ecclesiastical History of the English People, where King Edwin of Northumbria is debating with his counselors whether to convert to Christianity, and so they dismiss the missionary who'd been talking about them, and they have this little chat about whether or not to convert. And one of them tells that story about, you know, like life is like this. We're all sitting around the mead hall together, sitting around the fire, listening to the bard tell the story of the old days. And it's winter and it's night outside. It's dark. And in one end of the hall, through the open window flies a sparrow, and it flits straight through the hall and out the other end. And that is life, right? We're here for this brief moment of light together, making sense of this. But what comes before is darkness. What comes after is darkness. And so this is what we've got. This is our moment, you know. So yeah, that is most definitely something I think that we provide for each other, is meaning in fellowship, right? And I think that's the beautiful thing. So maybe we are surrounded by darkness, but hey, we're here right now. We're in the light together.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And yeah, talking about bards telling stories, we are so excited to hear the audiobook from Alan, the Library of Alexandria, narrating The Way of Edan. I mean, that's just going to be brilliant. How is it? Have you kind of been talking it through with him and preparing for it?
Yeah, we've had one meeting so far. And this is something that I think he's going to start in earnest when the summer comes. Because he's very busy, and you know he has to teach and do a good job with that, which he's very conscientious about. Plus, he had the accident, which fortunately he's recovering well from that. But so he's got a lot on his plate, and it's going to be a summer project, and we'll work a lot more together. But I've had a lot of fun chatting with him already once, where he recorded essentially me saying all these names, and he was expressed. I think it was kind of, you know, mock irritation at how many names it's got to pronounce. So many names, Philip. So many names. What are you doing? So many names, you know. And there are a lot of names, I know. But I think he's gonna have fun. Actually, he also was, you know, I think he was fake irritated about the songs of origin, right? The magic stuff. Yeah. But he did one, and it was like perfect. It was so good. I think because he knows Latin and he's used to declaiming Latin. He's going to be so good at that. Actually, people are going to be like, people who skip over the poetry parts and the magic-y stuff, the songs of origin. They're going to want to hear Alan say these because he's going to be that good at it. So yeah,
he's a great performer, and it's like he was made to narrate this book. Definitely.
Oh yeah, I think he's going to be brilliant. I'm so excited, and I think what my real hope is that this trilogy will be his first venture, and that he'll be asked by a lot of people to do narration for them, because I think he's very talented.
Yeah, he's definitely got that performer aspect. Every video of his is so entertaining, isn't it? Yeah. And it leads me. A lot of people are saying here that they've picked up so many books because of your channel. It's amazing now to get to read one of your works. Has kind of BookTube played a role in any of this, or moved forward your schedule, or how has that kind of played a role?
Well, I have to say that BookTube has given me a community that I can never express enough gratitude for. And if I were, it's given me, I mean, it's fairly apparent that because, people on this platform in our little corner know me, that has given me, an advantage to self-publishing. Would I be able to self-publish without having made myself part of this community over the last 3 years? Yeah, I would, but I think I would be climbing up a much steeper hill in terms of getting the word out. So, it's certainly, I think evidently, there's no question that people are going to, some people, who just know who I am are going to be curious because I talk about fantasy. I obviously love fantasy as a genre. So that's certainly helping me. I think what I'm seeing, though, too, is that people who don't follow my channel are reading the book, too. And I hope that most of them are getting, something out of it, that they're enjoying it as well. And so, yeah, you definitely don't need to ever see a video of mine to, I hope, appreciate the story. All comes from love of this genre and love of storytelling.
Yeah, where it's talking about kind of that passion again and writing something that from things that you would love to read. And yeah, it's amazing. The community is really amazing, isn't it? Kind of the support. And as you said, it's a little corner of the world and of people who read books, but it is fantastic, not only in motivating us to read more and getting so many recommendations that my TBR pile now is dangerous and it towers.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think we're all in that boat.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, all of your videos as well, absolutely love them. We've been following the channel for long before we became booktubers ourselves. And yeah, we've had quite a few amazing chats. And so, again, it's awesome to be chatting to you about this now. And yeah, it is great to kind of see that influence of booktube. Obviously, we often hear about kind of the negative sides of social media, but here is a big positive.
Oh, it's huge. And I got to say, one of my proudest accomplishments is that, and you guys have mentioned this a couple of times, is that I was part of a discussion that got you guys, the two of you, thinking about starting a channel. That was a discussion on your father's book, on Malice, I believe it was.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you started your channel had anything to do with something that I was involved in makes me really happy. Because I think everybody in the chat would agree that we are all so much richer for having the Brothers Gwyn out there as part of this really wonderful and supportive community.
Oh, you're far too kind, Philip. But yeah, we all watched it, and then Ed was like, "We must do a channel."
It was just so great to hear that people really got it. Really got Dad's books and picked up on the themes, and just it was usually it would just be us, wouldn't it, around the dinner table talking, and. Dad would be like, right, that's enough talk about me. Let's talk about something else. We're like, no, but
also
that
that discourse about books as well. It's all obviously a hobby that we share. And yeah, it's amazing talking about it as a family, but the more people we can talk to books about, the better. And I've just seen in the comments, people talking about favorite characters. And so there's some demands being made at you, Philip.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, maybe, who knows? I do want to spend more time in this world for sure.
Yeah. That's going to be one of my questions. Obviously, your time must be so filled up with planning kind of all the background, making final tweaks, getting all the details right, and everything to actually release the book. But is there still a part of you kind of thinking of kind of in the future further projects?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, right now, as you say, I'm very focused on editing and formatting book 2 so I can get it out for everybody on time on June 21. And then I'm going to be doing book 3. So that's my next, 6 months. I've got booked with that. No pun intended. And then it's the sequel that I've already written. And my goal is to get it out in 2024. And then I got to start writing new stories. So I'm trying to think of stuff. So I appreciate the idea for a Yoramon prequel. That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, I think if people could, they'd be shoving a contract in front of you right now to make sure that you do one. There's so many people that he's obviously becoming a favorite already. And here a comment about kind of the action scenes. We've not talked about that yet, have we? Did you have a specific approach to kind of the action scenes differing into kind of the rest of the narrative?
I did. Yeah. I hope that it comes through that violence is scary, that it is horrible, that it is not something that leaves people unscarred. Even if you survive, even if you're not physically wounded, when you witness violence, it has an impact on your psyche. And we have a lot of violence in fantasy. There's no doubt about it. Not every single fantasy writer has a ton of violence. You know, I mentioned Le Guin earlier. She tends to not have as much violence in the Earthsea books. It's there, but it's less prominent. But what I really wanted to do was to convey that violence has repercussions and it has causes too, because I'm just as interested in, okay, how did we get to this point where these people feel that not only do they have a right, but an obligation to attack those people over there? How do we get to that point? How do people arrive in that place in their minds where they feel that not only are they justified that, but that it's virtuous to attack people who are different from them? And that's something that, you know, is so a part of our human history, unfortunately. So I'm interested in how we get to that point of violence, and then what are the repercussions of that violence. And I don't want to make violence seem like it doesn't have consequences.
Yeah.
So I am trying to show it for, I mean, I felt awful what I did to some of the characters, particularly early in the book. I thought, oh, this is awful. This is brutal. I felt like a meanie, but I wanted people to feel invested in the character first, because I want you to feel that violence happens to people, not to characters who just go away and you don't have to think about. So I wanted that violence to have a repercussions, that it has repercussions that float through the rest of the story. So that's what I was going for there, in terms of, and I want people to feel this is visceral. This is not glorified. This is not kill a massive army of orcs and then move on like nothing happened. That there's no PTSD or no trauma from that, even when you're on the human side, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that kind of reminds me of I watched an episode of Page Chewing, and Evan Winter was saying he's got a lot of action, but he always makes sure that it's character development, it's linked to the characters. And also think about your writing. I love kind of the relationship between the epic and the intimate, and I think you kind of need both, because the epic is obviously kind of this vision of a grand action sequence happening, but then the intimate nature to it makes it moving, doesn't it, and evocative, and it makes it more powerful than just kind of seeing thousands of figures, and as you said, leading to those repercussions. And I loved it. I think it's very hard for authors, obviously, to strike that balance where you still feel like kind of that adrenaline of the individual caught in the conflict, but you're still kind of delivering on what is actually happening in the battle, so the reader can still kind of follow along.
Yeah, that's really well said. I would put up your father, John Gwynne, as a great model for describing that kind of thing. I mean, I think he's one of the very best at that. Joe Abercrombie is another one where everybody knows about his battle sequences, the head hopping, and you know the sense of just raw fear. And Abercrombie's a great example of somebody who does not glorify anything about people, let alone violence. It's dirty, it's muddy, it's gross, it's, you know, it's just, and there's fear and there's pain and there's just, it's all out there. And I thank goodness have never been in combat, and I don't want to be, but I would imagine that it's more like that than it is like these glorified descriptions of, you know, good conquering evil and that sort of thing. So
yeah, definitely. It kind of reminds me. Papa Gwyn said that he watched something Peter Jackson talking about directing The Two Towers, and his approach was to do an intimate shot focused on the character and then a wide shot. And kind of that relationship between the epic and the intimate. And it seems like maybe not consciously, but subconsciously, you're kind of taking a bit of that approach as well. To make sure
most definitely. I would say consciously even. Yeah. I mean, I think it's good to zoom out sometimes too, to give the reader a sense of what's going on the large scale. If you're talking about battles and that sort of thing. But then I wouldn't want the whole thing to be zoom out, because then you lose that intimacy, you lose that impact on the person, which is really what it's about to me. So
maybe a bit different from the action sequences, but yeah, this has started now.
So yeah, you shot yourself in the foot there, I think, Philip.
Oh, I think I did. Yeah. Maybe a parody video is in order.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's something we're looking forward to seeing.
And I look forward to seeing the thumbnail for it as well.
Yeah, just catching up. I'm a bit behind on the comments here, but people talking about Alan and the audiobooks. We really cannot wait for that, as we've talked about. And yeah, it just sounds so exciting, and obviously going to be instructing him in kind of the pronunciations as well. And because another part of kind of audiobooks, which I love, I know audiobooks don't click with everyone, but kind of it brings it to life in different ways than reading physically. And so that's why I love reading a book physically, but also audiobook as well. And especially when you can do both together as well.
And when you have a good narrator, it is a performance rather than just a reading.
Exactly.
And that's what makes those best audiobooks like stand head and shoulders above the others.
Yep. And I think that's what we're going to get from Alan. It will be a performance. I saw him in a play, not live. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have been there live, but he once posted a video of him doing a one-person play, and he was playing. It was based on the Iliad. In fact, it might even be called I forget what it was called. I think it was called the Iliad or something like that. But it's a modern rendition of the Iliad that explores things like PTSD and trauma and stuff like that in a really wonderful way. And Alan's performance gave me chills. It was so good. It was so amazing. And that's when I knew that's the reason why, actually, I reached out to him. It was actually Jimmy who suggested it to me and put the idea in my head. He said, yeah, Jimmy from the Fantasy Network said, you should ask Alan to do your audiobook. I was like, huh. You know what? And I thought back to that play that I saw of him and the chills that he gave me. And I thought, you know what? Jimmy's right. I think Alan would be brilliant at this. And of course, he does all these voices too. And there are certain characters where Alan is going to bring out, I think, some of his like Iscarl Pust voice for a certain character. He's going to bring out some of the voices that he's already made famous. Maybe something like those for a couple of the characters. Like,
yeah, he's definitely a method actor as well, I think. Yeah.
Hopefully he's not living like all of these characters. Yeah, some very true words here
from PL. Yeah,
no pain, no gain.
No,
for the characters.
I mean, obviously we love reading, but it's funny because I've made a few comments in our videos lately about when I've read books that don't have swords in, and it's a shocker that I enjoy them. But it's I'm only joking, but it's I love reading books where the stakes are high, but so in fantasy there's, like you said, Philip, there's a lot of violence, but it's because the stakes are so high. And one way to get attached to the characters is to know that what's waiting at the end of the tunnel. It's something dangerous that's going to put them in danger, and that's what scares you. It grows your attachment. So I definitely think it's necessary most of the time, anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of links to what says here, that the book is, you're not rushing into it. Because obviously one of the main things people think of when they think of fantasy is action. But you bide your time and you built up this tension and sense of absolute dread, where I was really dreading what was going to happen. And that leads me on to, I don't know how I've not mentioned it yet, you have some terrifying creatures.
Yes.
Where usually in a fantasy book I think, oh, that's a cool creature. Here I think that is terrifying, and I'm really visualizing it. And there's a specific scene I won't say, but there's basically a pit, and that really just affected me. I was visualizing this creature, and yes, that is another thing that people, I think they'll really enjoy in The Way of Edan. Did you kind of like coming up with these creatures? Was there inspiration for it, or was there kind of a mixture of both?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it was a bit of fun, and I kind of grossed myself out a couple times. And I also, though, I hope that there are certain points in the story where and it's a more modern fantasy in this sense, I think, where we tend to otherize anything that is not like us. And that goes for other people, but also other creatures. And I hope there are points in the story where that otherizing ceases and you realize how these are other lives with feelings, and that they're not just monsters, in other words. And yeah, they're scary. And to us, from a human perspective, they're gross and scary and all of that. But, you know, it's that old question, who are the real monsters, right? And to them, people, we are, I mean, you think about it, who's done the most violence, who's eliminated the most other species on the planet by, it's not even close. There's not even anything close to second place, other than maybe a meteor or something, or an asteroid. It's us. We are by far much scarier monsters from any other perspective but our own. And that's something I hope that I get across as well. And if you like the presentation of fantasy creatures in the first book, I think the second book just brings that way up. So to me, the second book, if you like the action in the first book, I think you're going to really love the second book.
I'm so glad to hear that.
And I really think, I mean, to me anyway, I feel like having those creatures as, you know, not being really the monsters, you know, and that feels a bit like a Beowulf nod to me, or, you know, Tolkien's essay,
The Monsters and the Critics.
And yeah, definitely feels like that. Is that what you were going for, Philip?
Yeah, I kind of also John Gardner's Grendel, which is very much Grendel's perspective on things. So yeah, and that's a very modern look at, you know, we moderns tend to like our heroes flawed and our villains complex, right? Yeah. And that's how we are. And I hope that, I don't think there's any doubt in my book who the heroes are and who the villains are, but I hope that I achieve some complexity. Eventually, I hope I did for most people, that there's some nuance there, and that my heroes are also flawed in their own ways too. But I had more fun probably doing the villains than in many respects. So,
but that's another thing. I love how you kind of got your foot in both camps, where on both sides there are people who are obviously terrible, but then there are people who you're rooting for as well. And it's kind of, you just want all these people to be on one side, and you're not going to get that. But I love how that as a whole new layer, and that just really mirrors life as well, doesn't it? It's not just people split into good and bad. It's that complexity about it. People who care about ones who we need some vengeance, but then you don't want that to affect the characters you care about as well. And a lot of people talking about these creatures, the Grudugs and the Uglaks, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, as I said, that scene where we meet one of them is really sticks with me.
And intended with the stick there and sticking.
And something else I've somehow not mentioned is kind of the magic system, which you kind of dip your fingers into in the Way of Edan. Was that something you kind of enjoyed kind of crafting and thinking of?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the magic system is intimately tied to what I'm trying to do thematically in this trilogy. What I'm exploring in terms of our place in the world. I didn't know about the wit in Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderling series when I wrote this, but I think of all the other magic systems I've read now, I can say that my magic is most similar to Robin Hobb's The Wit. If you've read Realm of the Elderlings. But it is, magic is intimately tied with my exploration of our place in the world, our place in the universe, our tendency to separate ourselves in our mind, which is something that we do all the time. It's not only from a species perspective, but from an individual perspective. It's all about me, right? I want to explore transcending those boundaries of self and species and culture, and looking at one's connection with other people, other species, the world around us. And this is in some ways this is where I get a lot from my time spent in South Asia, a lot from Hindu and Buddhist philosophy, and the idea that not only are we ephemeral, not only are we fleeting, but we are part of the world around us. We are connected with everything. And I mentioned a couple times on BookTube this book by Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Buddhist scholar who wrote this wonderful book called The Heart of the Buddhist Teaching. And in that book, he compares a human life to a wave on the ocean. And you think you're a happy little separate wave, right? But really, a wave is just part of all that water. Mm-hmm. And that's what we are as individuals. We tend to think of ourselves as the center of everything, as separate egos. But really, when it comes down to it, like if I were a creature from another dimension and I was looking at the material plane, and I'm looking at you and I and everything around us, we're all made out of atoms, right? And in the end, the atoms that make up that tree out there, the atoms that make up your dog, the atoms that make up you and me, it's all part of the same fabric, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something I'm trying to explore with this magic system.
Yeah, because as I was reading it, that is absolutely amazing, kind of seeing kind of more of the inspiration for it, but it's being linked to other life around you. And that's where I absolutely love it, when the setting is brought into play as well, where it feels like its own character. And yeah, that's something else that I absolutely love. And it links back to what I was saying about how visual your writing seems to be, especially with landscapes. I absolutely love that. Well, I think often the authors, they love kind of describing maybe the buildings and things that are very unique to the world. But I love kind of just your depiction of the land, and it really got across, again, that kind of Shire feeling at times.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some Tolkien influence there, the love of landscape. And to me, as a kid, I wanted to spend the rest of my life in the Shire, it's certainly yeah. I mean, and for me, I've always loved forests. So I had a lot of fun describing the Sylvan scenes in the book, and just trying to make a place feel real. I mean, that's the kind of writing that I love. So that kind of immersive experience. Some people, everybody has their own preference, I guess. Some people like that, more description, and then others want just the action to move along. And I think as a whole, fantasy has moved more in the direction of more action, less description. But I think there's still plenty of us who love to be immersed in a place and to take our time. I mentioned Hobb earlier. She's a great example of a writer who really takes her time to allow you to connect with the place and the characters so that you become invested and immersed, and that when things happen to them, it really matters. That's why you have to have a box of tissues with you when you read a Robin Hobb book. Right?
Yeah. I think your writing's got a great balance there, Philip, because as you said, you've also got those aspects where you are, describing things in a really beautiful and an evocative way. But then other times when the time demands it, you have a bit more of a stripped back style, especially in terms of action, I think, where it is, really progressing the actual motions of the scene. So I think, I think you've struck a great balance there, and that's your style, and that's brilliant. So yeah, it's definitely a winner there.
Yeah, it's very distinctive, isn't it?
Thank you. Yeah, I feel very strongly that it's important to have peaks and valleys in your storytelling, and that if you have just all action all the time, then it loses its novelty. And you need the time to get connected with the characters. And maybe not everybody has to be like Robin Hobb and ease you into it over the first couple hundred pages of the story. I love that myself. But it's a tricky thing to balance. Oh yeah, there they are, Realm of the Elderlings. It's a tricky thing to balance, I think. And everybody has their own, in the end, you just have to land where you feel is right. Because some people are going to be more on this side and others are more on this side, and that's okay. Just do what you feel is compelling in the end.
Yeah, and write what you love.
Because one of the wonderful things about reading is it's subjective, isn't it? Because we just be given a list of these are 100 books that everyone will enjoy, and then it ends. But to find your own kind of distinctive voice and something which people are really going to resonate with, different to any other book that they've read before, is I think one of the hardest things an author can do. And I definitely feel that with what you're talking about, these more kind of distinctive elements that you've thought through and form such a large part of kind of the passion and inspiration and formation of the Way of Edan.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's really well said. So Chris wants to know, balancing the planning, outlining with the spontaneity. Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer to the second part there is yes. I do go back and adjust the outline a lot. So if you saw my outline, it was originally typed and printed out nice and neat. And then I scratched out things. I wrote notes all over the margins. It looks like some, weird medieval manuscript with initially printed, but just like writing all over the place. And that's me going back and realizing, oh, no, I need to do this instead of this. So yeah, there's plenty of spontaneity in there. I'm not a pure planner, I guess, in that sense. But I had the major moments pretty much thought out, I would say. I did have a long debate about the end of the trilogy. The end of the trilogy. There were a couple of key things that I just didn't know what I was going to do until I wrote it, and probably went back and rewrote it a couple times. For the most part,
that maybe you had a few different options, but you weren't sure what direction you're going to go in, or was it more kind of what felt right at the time?
Two main options, and I kept going back and forth between the two. So yeah.
Well, I cannot wait to finish the trilogy and then ask you what maybe the other version was. Yeah. We've got a few more questions here. So yeah, without spoilers, kind of the prologue, because that is, again, without spoilers, very I was straight in, I was hooked. And
it sets the tone really well.
Did you have a specific kind of approach or inspiration for that? Maybe not kind of the scene exactly, but maybe the template or kind of that shocking factor to it.
Yeah, so I wrote the prologue long after I wrote the book. Actually, to tell you the truth, let's see, chapter 3 used to be the start of the book.
So, okay, yeah.
I should tell you a lot, yeah.
Yeah, I can kind of see that.
Yeah, but the prologue I felt was important. It was an incident that I referred to later in the book, and at a certain point, after I can't remember how many drafts, I realized, you know what? I need to show this scene because it's such an important event, and it has massive repercussions beyond the scene itself. And so I felt that it would also be a great way to set the tone and tell people this is a story about religion, because it is very central to what happens there in that scene. So I wanted that to be a big signal. I mean, that's what your prologue is, an opportunity to tell your reader, here's what this book is about. And I feel like I hit on some of the big themes in the prologue, the idea of looking at the other as foreign versus looking at the other and then realizing one's connection. I think I hit on the religious themes. Plus, I think it's an important plot moment as well, even though it happens before the main story gets started. But
yeah, definitely. I think there's often quite a debate, isn't there, about prologues, and a lot of people say that whilst it's thematically related to the book, the event doesn't directly actually impact the story or have those repercussions. So a lot of people think they should just be stripped. But with your prologue, as you said, you've kind of got that already, those key themes coming into play. But I love how there are repercussions and it does link in, and it is so integral to much of what happens next, kind of thing. And yeah, I'm so glad that scene was in there.
Yeah, what happens next, it's the whole continent away, but it is directly related to the prologue. So the one event in the chapter 1 where I'm kind of mean, that would not have happened if the thing that happened in the prologue hadn't happened. So yeah.
So Philip, you've worked quite heavily with your nemesis, AP Canavan, with the editing process. What's kind of the biggest thing you've picked up from working alongside AP, if you can tell us a nugget?
Wow. My goodness. I mean, I think what AP brings to his role as an editor is an amazing eye for the story's integrity. And that goes on from the minutest level to the biggest level. And so he'll notice often little things that don't make sense or that could be better. But what I really love about working with him is the bigger level observations where he'll say something like, to give an example, I'll give a specific example here that's totally non-spoiler. One thing he told me early on when looking at the first book is you have a tendency to have a character all by themselves and just sort of thinking. And yeah, there's maybe some nice things you're trying to get done there, but this would be so much more interesting if there were another person present and there was some dialogue. And you can bring out those same character traits with that dialogue. And I thought, he's so right. And there were actually several scenes that I rewrote that were originally just a character all by themselves. And I realized, oh, this is so much better with this other character present.
Sure.
So that was one thing. That's the type of thing that a really keen-eyed developmental editor can do, is to say, your story's good, but here, you can make it even more alive. You can make it more vivid, a much more interesting experience for the reader. Because it's more interesting to have two people talking and learning stuff about the characters through that dialogue than it is to have one character thinking, all by themselves.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I like that. Thank
you.
I
really do. It's just a flavor of kind of, I think it's another thing behind the scenes that I find so interesting, that you don't really get to see, do you, kind of how much the book has evolved and changed over time, with the author themselves kind of looking over and reevaluating kind of what's happening, but also all the editors and people involved and people's feedback. And so, yeah, it's amazing to see an insight into that. Yeah. I mean, it was really cool. And there's something like, I can't wait to talk about some specific scenes where AP had ideas of jazzing it up a little bit. So there are certain things that happen, just very specific details in the middle of a battle. He's like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you did this? I was like, yeah, that would be cool. Yeah. So, Yeah, I mean, we would love to, maybe before the release of book 2, to do a spoiler chat about the Way of Edan.
Yeah.
That would be absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, because again, as I was saying, kind of all those details that go into it, and yeah, that's so interesting. Was it quite nerve-wracking when you're kind of sending the Way of Edan off to people for the first time, like your nemesis, and seeing their feedback?
Little bit, not bad. I mean, it helped probably in my case that I think it helped that we were friends before he became my developmental editor. And that's another thing I have to thank BookTube for, because I met AP because of BookTube, so yeah, but yeah, no, it is a bit, I mean, you are exposing yourself to the world when you write and when you publish. And so there's no doubt about that. And it's it is a bit, fear invoking in some ways. But there's another whole side to that. And I think any writer could talk about this, is there's a thrill to sharing your story and having it in a way come alive because other people are reading your story. It enters a new space when other people are reading it and making it happen in here, and it's fun to hear how some people respond in ways that are maybe a little different from what you intended, but kind of neat, so yeah, that's a really fun thing to watch unfold. Yeah, because obviously writing a book, you have to love it, don't you, to put in, even though it must be very liberating. It's a lot of sacrifice of time and attention, isn't it? And so, yeah, it must be amazing finally kind of seeing people's reactions and sending that off, something that you've kind of cared for and grown over, as you said, 18 years. Yeah, well, of course, you two were the first booktubers to read my book, The Way of Edan. More than a year ago now, I think it was, right? Yeah, it was around that. That is crazy. About a year ago. Yeah, and we had our discussion, which has been up on my channel for all that time. But we also have our spoiler-filled discussion, which I can release finally after. I think I'll wait maybe a couple more weeks, but that's there, and it's gonna be fun to watch what we said a year ago. Yeah, it'd be great to watch, especially after we've reread it for the second time, exactly. So that we can see all of those kind of things there. And yeah, really excited. So Philip, how does it feel now that after your 18-year journey, well, probably more than 18 years because it was all your inspirations from reading, but how does it feel that you can finally say that you are an author? Ooh, It's amazing. You know, it's surreal and it's good. Mostly I just feel kind of peaceful. I feel good. I was worried about a kind of a letdown, and that might happen because that happens a lot. I think the further on you get in life, the more you find that major accomplishments, once they happen, you're kind of like, oh, it's over, you know, and you're like, now what, you know? That doesn't happen to me so much, maybe because I have book 2 to edit and book 3 to edit and even the sequel to work on. So I feel really good. I have stuff in front of me. I have the joy of watching people engage with the story right now, which is really cool. I'm trying to stay back and give people space because, you know, Mike has a thread in his Discord where people are starting to talk about it, and I'm trying not to comment in there because I want them to feel free to say whatever they want. Yeah. So I guess but I'm also nosy. So I do peek in there every once in a while, and it thrills me to see people getting it and saying really insightful things about it. And, you know, it's just awesome just to see that kind of reaction starting up.
Yeah, and as you were an Amazon #1 on there, weren't you?
For new release in military fantasy, yes.
Yeah. And his PL saying congrats on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that must have been an amazing moment as well.
It was pretty cool. I totally unexpected because I didn't realize I wrote a military fantasy.
An even better surprise.
Yeah. No, I'll take it. It's great. You know, the release did kind of push it into a few categories where it was showing up kind of for a moment there. It was, what was the other one? Sword and Sorcery. It was like 50 something for a moment. And then for epic fantasy, it was, I think, it was 200 maybe or so. So yeah, it crept up there, and I think that's pretty good for a self-published book.
It's incredible, definitely. And yeah, it's been so great. Like what we were saying earlier before we went live, that my Twitter over the last few days has just been pictures of your book everywhere, which is just wonderful to see.
Yeah, I'm happy every time I see one of those. Sorry.
That kind of leads to one of our patrons, Michael. He asked, at some point, maybe not now, but in the future, do you know if there will be a chance to get signed copies?
Ooh, that's a great question, and I keep meaning to look into that and figuring out how I could make that happen. The trickiest part is how people would pay for it, I guess, because essentially I would have to order the books myself, author copies, and then charge people for, you know, the postage because I can't afford to mail books all over the place. I would lose money that way, the way the postal system is these days. So, I have to figure out the logistics of that. I know there's got to be a way to make it work for a self-published author. So I know people sometimes do book plates and stuff like that.
But something I'm sure you'll be able to, there'll be an answer at some point, but everything's being thrown at you. See, this is the week of publication still, isn't it? Only came out a few days ago.
And I just got my author copies today. Like, so I'm a bit miffed about that, to be honest, because I wanted them 3 weeks ago and should have had them that long ago, but because of whatever, I just got it now. So thank you for
you can't see coming.
It's funny that people have already, you know, finished it and you didn't even have your copy yet.
I'm watching people, you know, with my book with copies of it, and I'm like,
hey, that's mine.
I don't have my book yet. Yeah.
So Philip, have your family read your work, and have they commented on it? Have they said anything?
Yeah, no, my wife is I guess I'm going to embarrass her by saying this, but she's my #1 fan, I think, and my #1 critic. So both, she fulfills both roles beautifully. So yeah, she has read the book, and that's true. I got a troll. You're not an author until you have trolls, right?
Yeah, I watched Mike said that on his video, didn't he?
Yeah, something to that effect. but yeah, no, my family's aware. My father has been a big supporter as well, and I've had friends over the years, and now lots of friends here on this platform. So Jimmy came to confess that he was the troll.
We knew it.
We knew it. We knew it all along. So there he is. There he is, the culprit. Yeah.
The culprit himself.
We should have known.
The grand reveal.
So yeah, no, but speaking of Jimmy and people like you guys, the support from my friends here has been very moving to me. I get emotional sometimes. I haven't with the actual book release, but I'll tell you when I got emotional was I made a video about the fact that I'm going to publish this year. When I made the decision to go ahead and self-publish, that was a little while ago. I released a video announcing it, and I got all these beautiful comments. And as I was reading them, I just broke down in tears because of that response. And I thought, I can say one good thing I did in my life, at least, was to join this community, and where there's so many amazing, supportive people that I just can't really express how grateful I am for that.
Yeah, it's an honor to have you part of the community, Philip. And obviously, people get so much from your videos, all your recommendations, and now books as well.
Yeah. I hope that there's a story here that people will that'll resonate with people. I'd love to give people something like what Tolkien did for that 12-year-old boy. That's been the goal all these years, really. So if somebody experiences a sense of beauty, a sense of wonder, a bit of melancholy perhaps as well in the course of reading these, then I will be a happy fellow.
That is brilliant. And Philip, thank you so much for giving us your time today to answer all these questions, because we've had a few chats together, haven't we? But not as an author. We did that chat with you last year, but now with it now being published, it has been amazing that we had the chance to read it early, and it is a big honor of ours. And seeing our names in the front as well was an amazing moment. And yeah, we're proud to be in the front of such a fantastic book.
I am so very, very honored that the two of you are in here. And also, some other Gwyn guy wrote a blurb for me too. Another Gwyn guy. So it's just it's a thrill to have friends like you having read the book and given me insights about it, and writers like your father, whose work I admire so much, to have written kind words as well. It's a really cool thing. I really can't describe it, but it makes me feel part of a community, and that is a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, you're a big figure in the community, Philip. So, we're really grateful. You started our booktube journey, and it's just amazing that that your book is finally out. People are enjoying it, and it was wonderful to have the chance to read it early and then do some videos with you and talk about it. Now, before we sign off, it wouldn't be a Brothers Gwyn author interview without this question, but we have to ask you: elves or dwarves,
or should we say dwarves?
Dwarves. Yeah. Oh gosh. You mean
And you've got them both, so yeah, it's double hard, isn't it?
Well, the elves in my world are really
very
pretty different, pretty scary. No
Legolasses.
No, they're not pretty pointy-eared people. They're pretty primally frightening. I'm afraid though I'm gonna have to go with elves though, and that's just kind of, I don't know. I love dwarves too though. So
yeah,
that's
sorry we had to make you choose and end on that note.
I'm going with elves though. Okay, I'm committing elves.
Final decision.
We'll go for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Final answer.
It's a good choice. It's a good choice. And everyone, thank you so much for watching and listening to this chat. And hopefully you enjoyed and were intrigued by the questions we were asking, and of course by the answer given by Philip. It was so brilliant to see insights into things that as reading it again for the second time, picking it up, but then kind of seeing the background, the inspiration, and what formed it. It really is an amazing thing, and that's another reason we're so lucky with BookTube, aren't we? And being able to have this chance to talk to you when you find a work that you love, and it adds so much more depth and meaning when you can see what was going on in the background and all the subtext as well. And so, Philip, thank you so much once again for being with us today, and truth and courage.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. Thank you, everyone, for joining us as well. If you weren't sure, but yeah, please go and get The Way of Edan.
Yeah, I'll put links in the description below for the UK and the US as well. So yeah, do head to there if you haven't got it already. But everyone, as I said, thank you so much for watching. Truth and courage.
Truth and courage, everyone.